All right, it looks like our attendee numbers have about stabilized, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's work group on the implementation of the Innovative Small E-Fleets pilot. My name is Andrea Morgan, and I'm the staff lead at CARB for our Clean Truck and Bus Voucher Incentive Project, which is better known as HVIP. I'm joined today by Nikki O'Cook of CalStart, who is leading the development of the Innovative Small E-Fleets pilot, and we're happy to be joined by several other CARB staff today as well. At today's work group, we will be discussing the Innovative Small E-Fleets pilot, which aims to provide incentives to help small trucking fleets and independent owner-operators make the transition to zero-emission trucks. The Innovative Small E-Fleets pilot was approved by our board last November as a set-aside within HVIP with $25 million to pilot incentives for zero-emission vehicles geared towards small trucking fleets and independent owner-operators. We intend to take what we learn from this initial pilot and apply it at a larger scale to shape our future investments in heavy-duty technologies. Before we get started, a little information on work group logistics. Today's work group is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be posted on CARB's low carbon transportation webpage within the next 2 weeks. Today's work group is really intended to be a conversation, and throughout the morning we will pause for questions and comments, and at that time we will ask that you raise your hand to let us know that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. CARB staff will then unmute your line. And for anyone participating via phone, you can press #2 to raise your hand. And you may also use the question and answer box to ask questions. We'll remind you of these instructions throughout the work group. And as always, we appreciate your patience if we run into any technical glitches. So now I'll turn it over to Nikki, who will be leading today's conversation. Nikki?
Thank you so much, Andrea. We have posted an agenda that covers sort of 3 broad categories. Over the course of the last year, we have been doing focus groups and interviews and listening to public feedback, and we really look forward to hearing all of the input that you have to offer us today. So the 3 broad categories of information and areas of discussion that we'd like to cover today are: 1, the small fleet definition. How are we defining small fleets? There's several different metrics that have been used in other programs, and we want to hear from all of you which one works the best, which is the simplest to understand and the easiest to apply. The second category is really, what are the elements of the Isaf program that a proposer would need to bring forward, right? The Isaf model is that we really want to learn about alternative financing mechanisms that have not been previously allowed within the HVIP program. And we really want to see how those financing mechanisms can help small businesses make the transition to zero emission. So we are allowing different groups of what we're calling sort of proposers, right? It could be a dealer along with a financing partner, perhaps a charging partner, or a truck as a service model. So all of those are some of the elements that could go into a proposal. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about what is that sort of provider team look like, and what should the proposal look like. And then lastly, once the voucher is awarded, there have been some questions about what ways will it be similar to HVIP, and in what ways could it potentially be different from traditional HVIP. And so we'll spend a little bit of time talking about things like, is the voucher paid upfront or over time? Are there milestones, and what is the typical term for financing and voucher reporting? So to start us off, let's start with the very first question that probably comes to everyone's mind when they read Innovative Small E-Fleet, is what is a small fleet? As I mentioned, there have been other programs that have said small is less than 50 or maybe even less than 10. Our current proposal lands somewhere in the middle. We've spoken with some small trucking fleets, and several of them said that the right number is less than 20 trucks in a fleet. We have also added the additional subscription that each trucking fleet, each company, should have less than $15 million a year in revenue. And that is what is defined in California statute as a California small business. It used to be less than 10 million. It was recently increased to 15. So less than $15 million in gross revenue, right? So that implies gross, not profit. And so I would be very interested to hear from our stakeholders today if that definition sounds good, if it rings true, if there are any recommendations, if these are the best parameters, if it's too limiting or, in your opinion, potentially too broad. So with that, I'll pause just a moment for questions and comments. We have folks that are monitoring both the chat and the Q&A.
And it looks like our first raised hand is from Kashdeep Kapoor. I will open your line and you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself with your name and affiliation.
Yeah. Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So my name is Akash. I run a small fleet out in Central Valley, California. PA Transport's our name. And to your statement earlier about that, right about where you guys fell around is that 20 or below. I honestly, I think that's, so we're small in the sense that I think we are currently 7 units. And this has been a topic I've been considering since we had truck 1. Electrifying our fleet and how is that possible considering we're small, and what all the other stuff, characteristics that fall along with it. I think honestly, your 20 units and below makes sense. Once you hit above 20, you start falling into that medium size, and then you have the 50 and 100, which I think is reasonably said could be medium to large. And then even within that revenue cap, I know when we sign up for the SBA 8A programs and some of the other ones, that there is that revenue cap on those. And I don't quite remember what our restrictions were when we were applying for that, or whether to be a minority-owned business. But I know they were right about close to what you're saying. And I think you said 15 million. Is that right?
Yes.
In gross revenue. Yeah. In my mind, that makes the most 10, 22. Yeah, I think that makes the most sense if you're considering the size, and that's in it's not either or, right? It's and. Sorry, your voice cut off there. I didn't quite catch it, Nikki.
Yes, it was an and.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I honestly, I think with some of the other places that have their own restrictions on size, like certifications and stuff like that allow you to be, specified as a small business, or like you said, specified as a minority-owned business, and that falls pretty similar to what everything else has.
Great, that's great to hear. Thank you so much. I saw one comment jump up from Gary. He says 20 would work, 10 would be probably too few, and not sure what the purpose of the income limitation is. So when we started exploring this, we did come across some companies who would have qualified under the 20 or less trucks. However, they were actually quite large, sometimes global companies that were very well capitalized. And it was our impression that this enhanced incentive and enhanced technical assistance and flexibility in financing was really intended to help smaller businesses, which is why we began considering the revenue cap as well. I think that our last commenter also raised a very good point, which is at the beginning when we were building this program and giving consideration to how we define qualified fleets, there was a time that our team was certainly proposing whether or not to use any of the women-owned, veteran-owned, or minority-owned business designations. However, some of the feedback we received is that very often those designations are difficult to acquire. And so we thought that perhaps by using a truck and revenue model, we could serve the same group of companies without necessarily requiring that they go out and get extra additional, sometimes expensive and time-consuming qualifications. We have a question in the chat here, which is this program only for small businesses, or can a school also apply? So great question. At this time, we are proposing that this program would be for privately owned truck fleets only. So it would not include government fleets, school fleets. It wouldn't include shuttle bus fleets. It would be for small, privately held trucking companies only. However, we are very interested to hear feedback on this. We have received some written comments recommending and requesting that the program be open to government fleets as well. So I'm happy to pause here if there are some comments on either one of those items.
We do have a raised hand from Adam Browning. Adam, I have opened your line. You can unmute and begin speaking.
Hey, good morning. I'm with Forum Mobility, and just to this point, I'm wondering if you could share more details on, you have a lot of data already on who's been able to access through the normal program. Who are you not reaching? What are the, on the last workshop, you shared that less than 6% of the funding was going to fleets of 10 trucks or less. And I've also heard that no funds have gone to the independent owner operators. And so, maybe there's a way of, again, looking at who's already able to access the funds and really driving down on, you have a lot of data on who's not able yet and draw your lines accordingly. I also just want to, mention, like, as you build your, as this pilot proves itself, looking at your metrics of success, and then figuring out, like, what are the learnings and how can you expand anything that is enhancing of regulation or enhancing of access. It very well may be that you provide a path that helps the really small independent operators, and it's also good for larger ones as well. So, but I'm supportive of this, of course, being firstly designed to really serve the very large group of very small operators that haven't been able to participate at all. Thank you.
Great, and thank you for your comment. I think that it's important for all of us to understand that this this first year that we have created this set aside for small fleets will be a year of learning. We imagine that the form that Isaf is taking this first round will change and evolve over time based on important stakeholder feedback from all of you, and that maybe it will be tuned up or tuned down in different ways in the coming years. But we wanted to leave it open and flexible to give us real opportunities for real learnings. I see a question here from Ben who says, are there other HVIP options available for larger fleets, since this looks like it's specifically smaller? And yes, that's true. So the traditional HVIP tracks have some very different definitions, and they do allow for larger fleets. So I recommend that you take a look at the CaliforniaHVIP.org website and learn more about how larger fleets can participate in what we are now calling sort of traditional HVIP. Also, for those of you who are not prepared to make verbal public comment now, I really would appreciate hearing from you in written form. You can send in all of your comments, questions, concerns to Isaf at CaliforniaHVIP.org. So that's ISEF, that's the acronym for Innovative Small E-Fleet, Isaf at CaliforniaHVIP.org.
Okay, it looks like our next speaker is Ladonna Williams. Ladonna, I have opened your line. You can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Yes, good morning. Ladonna Williams. I'm with All Positives Possible in the Bay Area. I just wanted to say thank you. It's been a lot of great information. We've been attending some of these workshops, but it's almost overwhelming to us. And trying to figure out, with this being a pilot project, where would a small business, particularly we serve disadvantaged communities, trying to increase engagement from the Black community, which we know there's been really, very small numbers of engagement. We want to figure out where and how do we begin to support them in getting started. When, we go to the website, it does have a lot of information, but if we're like, is there a quick start, and I don't mean it in a way of not having to do our due diligence and our research and our work, but it's so much information. It's just hard to really know where do you, as a fleet or a small business wanting to get into this, where do you get started? Thank you.
That's a really excellent question. So by way of background, I will offer that traditionally HVIP is an incentive that is given out through dealers. So really the dealer has always been the fleet's first and best partner in that purchase process, right? You start thinking about a truck, you walk into your local dealership, they can show you what's available as far as incentives on HVIP, and it's the dealer that helps that fleet complete all of the paperwork to request the voucher. It has typically also been the role of the dealer to advise the fleet on what chargers should be installed and where, and how much and what type. So, but one thing that we also recognize though is that very often for folks who sell vehicles, right, the time that you have to invest with a small fleet to sell only one or two trucks, right, can be very costly and very time intensive. And therefore, sometimes there's not as great a return on those sales that you make to smaller fleets when you could be pursuing, large contracts and large accounts. And so that really motivated us to try to create this type of program so that a small fleet could purchase the vehicle in a way and at a rate that's beneficial to them, but also incentivizes the dealer to make that time investment. Now, in addition to the fact that we want to help dealers, vendors, and OEMs be more supportive of small fleets, we would also like to provide additional support. So within the HVIP program, especially for these small fleets and especially for the drayage category, we are going to be offering technical assistance to help folks sort of navigate this. There's also new infrastructure incentives coming forward, and they also have a suite of online resources and tools to really try to help folks understand how to get charging installed at their yards, whether or not they lease or they own, or maybe they want to use public charging. So I understand definitely what you're saying, Ladonna, that there are so many resources and it can be super confusing, but we are certainly working to bring all of those resources together and also to make sure that both dealers and the HVIP administrators can act as a real support service for those small fleets in navigating all of this.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to read this question. I'm not sure that I completely understand it, but hopefully by reading it, I will understand. It says, I do not have knowledge of traditional definitions of small business. We are a spinoff of a larger firm. Is there any way to see this? Because this to me says there would be better financed and than a standalone self-sustaining firm. I hope this makes sense. I see what you're saying. So in this instance, you are speaking of a business that is a subsidiary of a larger firm, therefore may have maybe access to more capital or access to the resources of that larger firm, but you are in fact a standalone business. That's an excellent question. I don't believe that we had gotten down to the very clear definitions and distinctions between how one small business needed to be incorporated. So I will take that back as feedback for our group. Thank you. I see here one recommendation. What about companies that have a fleet of less than 45 and $11 million in revenue? So this would be a company that has more than 20 vehicles, but less than $11 million in revenue. So as it's currently proposed, that fleet would not qualify. However, if you would like to make a recommendation or suggestion that we increase the number of trucks that are in the definition of a small fleet, I will certainly take that feedback here to our group. I see from Matt Smith, would this program be receptive to supporting EV truck leasing, either directly through the lessor or directly to the leasee? Yes. So we are very interested in seeing all of the different types of models for vehicle financing, which could include traditional financing, lease, all-in lease models, truck as a service models, per mile billing rates, short-term rentals. So all of the things that have not necessarily been allowed in traditional HVIP, but which we believe would open up valuable and interesting learnings and opportunities for smaller fleets to begin their transition to zero emission. So yes. Were there any other raised hands?
We don't have any. Oh, yes, we do have another raised hand. Thomas Poveromo, I have opened your line. You can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
How you doing? I'm Tom Poveromo from UCLA. I just wanted to make a quick comment on somebody asked a question earlier about how it's a little bit confusing. I agree 100%. It is a very, it's a detailed process, but what I can say is from our past experiences, the manufacturers that you utilize, whether that's Green Power or Lightning or C or anybody like that, they have designated teams that will walk you through the process. So if you're going to invest in one of their make and models, make them do the work for you. And I can say with all confidence and past experiences that UCLA has had, we've had a lot of success with the HFIB program, and they do the work for us, you know. So rely on your resources and they will assist you. Just wanted to make a comment.
Great, thank you. That's very good feedback. I see Gary here supporting the idea that perhaps public fleets should also be included in this, that very often public agencies and government agencies do not have the budget to finance, especially small ones. And I see here that perhaps we should segment out the components of medium and heavy duty from light duty. So this is another comment that we had received, which is if the fleet number limit is 20, could that be only 20 trucks, and then maybe they have other light duty vehicles that don't get counted in that count of 20? I've heard that feedback before. And yes, this would be now the second or third time that we've heard potentially that smaller government or public fleets would be interested in utilizing a program like this. Billabooty has put in the chat that West Oakland AB 617 is planning a truck fair in Oakland to reach out to owner operators and small fleets. Please reach out to WEOP, and I'm very happy to say that HVIP is also supporting in that truck fair in Oakland next month. All right.
Okay, it looks like our next commenter is Hector Castillo. Hector, I've opened your line. You can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Yes, good morning. This is very exciting. My question is, if the company is leasing from a sister company, the trucks, and the company is a drayage company, and they actually do not own any of the vehicles, and they make less than 15 million a year in revenue, would they qualify?
My initial impression is yes, though I believe we'd have to look more closely at that model. But you're touching on an important point that previously within HVIP, there were certain constraints from companies, OEMs, maybe leasing from themselves or setting up leasing or rental models within themselves. And this Isaf set aside would be an opportunity to begin to explore those models.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Matthew Essex. Matthew, I have opened your line. You can unmute and begin speaking.
Okay, hi. Thanks for, this is my second HVIP work group meeting in 2 days. We had a school bus one yesterday. So there was a program that was specifically set up for, it was called the Rural School Bus Project, and it was set up for small and medium air districts and specifically excluded the largest air districts, and they folded that program into HVIP. And that was what we discussed yesterday. So, and we certainly think that the small and rural school districts definitely deserve their own pot of money. The problem is there's a very large amount of small school districts inside the largest air districts, like South Coast, San Joaquin Valley. There's a whole bunch of small, especially rural school districts in the Central Valley that don't have a lot of money, that are now being excluded from the opportunity to go electric. So I realized earlier that you had said that you were thinking about that, possibly allowing government entities and perhaps school districts. But I just wanted to point out that there are some very underserved smaller school districts that don't have a lot of money that could use your help now, because that specific HVIP program is not going to allow them to apply. It's a lot of money, and we'd love to we'd love to be part of that, especially down in LA and in the Central Valley. But again, we don't have that opportunity, so perhaps we could have that in this program.
I see my colleague Andrea has come onto video perhaps to answer this question.
Yeah, hi, Matthew. And I know I saw a few other questions related to school buses pop up in the chat in the Q&A box. I wanted to take a quick moment to talk a little bit about what is available for school buses. While Matthew, you did correctly note that there is a new set aside plan within HVIP that focuses on small and medium air districts and helping school districts get into electric trucks in those districts. The broader HVIP program is still accepting applications from school districts across the state. So larger air districts will have the opportunity, or schools located within larger air districts will still have the opportunity to apply for HVIP vouchers through those programs. I know there was also a question about if private schools would be eligible for funds through this program or through other programs, since they've been excluded from eligibility in the broader HVIP program, as well as some other CARB programs. And that's a little bit of a complicated answer, and it really ties back to some language that's within the state constitution that makes it difficult for us to provide incentives directly to private schools. So the focus of this set aside, the Innovative Small E-Fleets program, we are looking at initially really focusing on trucking fleets but we do plan to continue to support school districts, both with the set aside that you mentioned, Matthew, and within the broader HVIP program.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much.
I would like to invite Casey Manawadu to come off of mute and ask your question, because I would need you to define that term for us. Casey? Well, the question that you've asked has to do with having several trucks that are placed in P&O. Would these trucks be considered as part of our fleet?
Sorry, this is Casey Manor. I'm at Pacifica Trucks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, quick question that we have. I mean, there's a driver shortage right now. Everybody's trying to get drivers. So we have about 25 trucks, but we have placed several of the trucks at P&O. So do these trucks consider as part of your fleet when you counting them towards the 20 minimum limit?
Could you define the term P&O?
Plan not to operate. So you pretty much you don't pay registration on DMV. You just register them as non-operative for that year.
Mm-hmm.
So do they still count towards your fleet?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so you have several trucks that are not operating at this time because of the driver shortage, and you would like to know if that would count towards your fleet.
Yes.
Gotcha. That's an excellent question. I do not have the answer to it, but I will definitely note it down here as something to take into consideration, exactly how we would define truck operating, truck ownership, and things like that, and whether or not trucks that have been put on non-operation would be included.
Thank you.
I see a question from Lacey Robertson, which is, who would be the applicant for the small e-fleet? Would it be the small business? And what if multiple fleets wanted to apply together for a truck on a sharing program? So thank you for that, Lacey. That actually transitions us very well to the second agenda item, which is for us to discuss sort of what are the elements of the proposal and the provider team and who would that group be, and what would an offering really look like. Before I move on to that second agenda item, though, are there any last words or last comments on how we define small fleet?
We do have a raised hand from Matt Schrapp. Matt, I have opened your line. You can unmute and begin speaking.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, staff, for providing some opportunity here for folks to engage in this. I guess a couple things just relative to the fleet size considerations and plan non-operation. The way the on-road rule works is that any vehicle that is registered to that particular fleet is considered as part of that fleet size, regardless of whether or not the vehicle is placed in planned non-operation. So if you guys were need to make considerations for that, I believe that you'd have to address that consideration under the on-road rule when it comes to what vehicles are considered part of the fleet, so to speak. And then on a separate but related, I guess it's hard to speak directly to what would be considered appropriate fleet sizes and revenue caps without knowing exactly how much the incentive is going to be. Are you guys going to be going over within this presentation what amounts you're looking at specifically for individual categories? And related to that, those limits have been established, it would seem, especially the revenue limits, as you alluded to earlier, Nikki. The fleet size is all over the road. You have the existing cow cap is 10 or fewer. You have the small fleets consideration in on-road, which is 3 or less. So, I mean, I feel like 20 is a good number, as long as it wouldn't preclude larger entities like leasing groups who might own their own vehicles and be much higher level of capitalization and revenue from participating, in order to open up some of those innovative leasing options at some established leasing companies. So I guess the question is will we be seeing what the proposed amounts are for the HVIP or for the innovative fleets incentive would be today?
Yes, I sure will. Thank you. So I guess, like Lacey, Matt is moving us right along on the agenda. Our second item, as I mentioned, has to do with what's in the proposal, who's the provider, what does an offering look like? And so we have a few proposed concepts here that we'd love to hear your feedback on. So firstly, to answer Lacey's question, the concept here would be, again, that the way that HVIP works, right? A dealer actually requests the voucher on behalf of the small fleet, but in this case, it could be more than the dealer. So we are looking at all types of providers, which can include truck as a service companies. It could be maybe a partnership between a dealership and their financing company. It could be a dealership offering short-term rentals. So any of those providers would be allowed to put forward an offering. And you're right, some of those offerings may include options where a truck is shared between fleets, like in a short-term lease rental, or I saw also Fluid in the chat there talking about their model for shared trucks and truck as a service. So all of those would be acceptable here. To Matt's comment, the proposed funding that we have put forward was to cap out at 2 times the current HVIP voucher. Now, here is the thinking, right? Our desire, like HVIP, is to cover the incremental cost. And so we would really like to get the cost for a small fleet down to something close to what they spend on their diesel vehicles now, or gas, on their diesel vehicles now, right? So if their current ICE vehicle has, say, a monthly lease rate of $1,500 and maybe fuel expense of something similar, they're spending about $3,000 a month on that vehicle. We would like to get an electric vehicle into their hands at a comparable rate. And we believe that if we just put that, we would like the provider team to show us an offering of how much it would take to arrive there. So we're actually not setting the incentive amounts in stone. Our desire, rather, is that a proposal is brought forth that demonstrates that with this level of incentive, we can get to this price point for our customers. However, we are capping it at a cap of 2 times the current HVIP voucher for that vehicle class. So for example, in the HVIP catalog today, if you look at class 4 and 5 vehicles, the incentive level is, I believe, 60,000. So we would cap ours at 120. The class 6 through 7 vehicles, I believe it's 65. So we would cap, no, sorry, I got that wrong. But the cap would be 170,000. And then the class 8 vehicles right now in the HVIP catalog are $120,000 incentives. We would cap at twice that, or 240. But we would hope that not everyone is writing their proposal to the cap. We would hope, in fact, that we are taking a serious look at what these customers are spending on their current ICE vehicles and how we can get electric vehicles into their fleet at a rate that is comparable or even slightly less in order to create a real sustainable and replicable model for how we can deploy electric vehicles with small fleets across the state. I'll pause there for questions.
We do have a raised hand again from Matt Schrapp. Matt, I have opened your line.
Thanks, Jason. And just to identify something, I'm Matt Schrapp with the Harbor Trucking Association. So specific to drayage, if you're in a disadvantaged community and you're utilizing the drayage uptick in HVIP, you're looking at 162,000 for HVIP for a class 8 truck. So you guys would still use the 120 limit, even if it was a drayage fleet who was registered in a DAC, it still would be capped out at 240. First question, and then second question is, what are you basing those operating costs on now for ICE? Because this market today is much different than it was, say, 2 years ago. I'm seeing used vehicles right now, later model year, moderate to low mileage at $199,000 for a used truck. So that drastically changes the economics for folks. So curious, will there be a drayage consideration and a DAC consideration relative to the cap? And then what are you guys using to determine existing costs? Because you said existing, Nikki, so I'm just kind of trying to build a little bit on that. Some expansion on that would be helpful as well. Thank you.
Those are both great questions. So we had not considered whether or not to allow also the enhancements to be factored into the voucher levels, but if that is your recommendation, we will certainly take it into consideration that the increased voucher levels for drayage and for DAC deployment also be reflected on the Isaf side. So thank you for that feedback. On to your second question. Yeah, not even just 2 or 3 years. The landscape for operating costs for diesel trucks has changed significantly, even in the last 6 months that we've been conducting this research. The cost of trucks and the cost of diesel have both gone up quite a bit. I believe at this time that we would like the providers to bring forward, the most reflective pricing that their customers are currently experiencing, because they have to make decisions to purchase either a used diesel or potentially to try an electric truck now in this current landscape. So if you as a provider can give us evidence of what they would currently be looking to for their diesel costs and what incremental cost difference to an electric would be and what sort of incentive would buy down that cost, then that's what we would like to see in these proposals.
And would the infrastructure costs associated with deployment of electric vehicles be considered in the total vehicle cost beyond total cost of operations, I guess you could say, as opposed to just the vehicle costs in the proposals? Would you recommend that folks are trying to lean more on that and capitalize out how that infrastructure cost would contribute to that total overall number? Because obviously the truck is one component, but the infrastructure portion, I think, is potentially even more costly for folks who are trying to install their own infrastructure, especially.
Absolutely. So we see infrastructure, both the complications and the expense of infrastructure, as one of the great barriers to small fleets. So it has been our proposed preference that all of these offerings would include both a vehicle and some sort of infrastructure solution, though we are quite open to what form that could take. One option could be simply to sell and install the charger with the truck and finance in a traditional fashion. Other options can include things like truck as a service, where in fact the fuel would even then be included with the maintenance for maybe a per mile or a per month charge. We've also considered accepting the dealerships who may choose to install a charger at their site and have their customers charging at the dealership, or even potentially selling a vehicle with something like a fueling card so that they can be using public fueling options. All of these are acceptable under this program, or proposed to be acceptable under this program, unless we hear otherwise from you here today, with the concept of being flexible and adaptable. And again, for us to be able to learn in this first year of which models really do work the best for small fleets.
Our next raised hand is from B. Shiraz. B, I have opened your line. You can unmute and begin speaking.
Thank you so much. Hey, Nikki, how are you going?
Good, thanks.
Lakey, I've got a question. Like, I'm sorry, I joined late. So I heard you talking about the cap thing, that if for class 4 to class 5 hatch whip is 60,000, the cap would be up to 170,000. I did not, my question number one is, can you please explain that again? Because I did not get that. And the other question is, with hatch whip, I know that we can stack hatch whip up with DEC incentives, but are there any other programs available that we can stack hatch whip up with?
So you're right. When you came on, I was just misspeaking what the current HVIP voucher is in the catalog, but the proposed concept for the innovative small e-fleet set aside would be that if a provider is able to include a vehicle along with a charger and some wraparound services for a small fleet, that they could have up to twice the current HVIP voucher that's listed in the catalog. So best thing would be to refer to the HVIP catalog and then double that. That is only the proposed one, though. We are open to hearing other input. I did receive some written feedback that in fact maybe the number is more like 2.5x of the current HVIP voucher. And then yes, like Matt, you are also inquiring as to whether or not the additional funding or enhancements that are available within HVIP would also be applied in Isaf. And so we're going to take that feedback back to our group for consideration. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nikki.
Our next speaker is Adam Browning. Adam, I have opened your line. You can unmute and begin speaking.
Thanks, Adam Browning with Forum Mobility, and love the creativity and thinking through this part of the process. But I'm also just wondering if some potentially unintended consequences here, where the entire sort of ecosystem of providing a lower cost EV, vis-a-vis an ICE vehicle depends upon a bunch of other programs as well, building the charger as well as the, access to the low carbon fuel standard for the fueling. And it just, I'm wondering if this doesn't set up a system where you make the HVIP do more work than it should be doing. If you're have one proposal that makes the truck free, but makes the trucker service or the people operating the truck have to figure out the whole charging on their own, it could meet your standard, but be a really inefficient use of HVIP funds because it's not taking advantage of all the other programs that are also out there. Given the fact that, we have overall a huge gap between the amount of HVIP funds and the number of trucks that need to be replaced, I would encourage you, and we'll provide written comments to this point as well, to make sure that winning proposals, if you're trying to build a sustainable system going forward, make as efficient use as possible of HVIP funds and also include others. So do you get what I mean? Do you see what I'm saying by, you could meet that standard that you've thrown out as a cheaper truck solution, but if you're relying upon double the current HVIP voucher and not taking advantage of the other programs, you're sort of undercutting HVIP, and it would be an inefficient use of this particular program.
Yes, you're certainly right. And I believe that part of that logic is why HVIP no longer funds infrastructure. Some of the reasons we had thought to include infrastructure here at this time is simply because of the timing doesn't always line up between incentives, though internal coordination is certainly closing the gap there. And I think that we will have learned quite a bit after the first year, but you're absolutely right. The goal is always to deploy more vehicles with the fleets that need it most and the areas that need it most. And if there's more efficient ways to coordinate with other incentives, especially for infrastructure, that would definitely be one of our priorities.
So I'm sorry, would you anticipate then that under this proposal that the HVIP voucher could be used for infrastructure?
Under the Isaf set aside, these proposed financing mechanisms should include both a vehicle and a charging fueling solution of some kind. We're fairly open to what the definition of that might be. Traditional HVIP does not cover infrastructure. Under Isaf, it could be used towards a charger or otherwise. Another important note to make is I believe I had one written comment wondering if Isaf could be combined with HVIP, and at this time, no. So there would not be sort of double vouchering. It would be if a small fleet belongs in Isaf, and that's where they're going to make a purchase, that's where they go. If not, they would go to the traditional HVIP route, which, as we mentioned, does not include infrastructure incentives. Most infrastructure incentives will be coming out next month with the Energize programs opening of the fast track for incentive requests.
All right, our next raised hand comes from Mark Roost. Mark, I have opened your line. You can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Hello, thank you. So addressing that last person and what his concern is also, I was just told a week ago that a trucker, a small fleet trucker, 6 trucks, went to purchase 3 replacements used. So he's in drayage, which means that trucks are bought new by long haul. After 3 years, they're sold to the regionals. And after 500,000 miles total, they're sold to the drayage people who run up to 1 million miles. And they can, and given the low rates they are paid for their work, they can only afford to buy at $30,000 to $50,000 per truck. And so he went to a dealer, and the guy had 1 truck available, 200,000 miles, $150,000. What's happened is that partly in anticipation of the deadline of the end of this year for 2009 and earlier diesel engine model years in the ports and multimodal rail hubs that you guys are enforcing. And as far as the last I heard was you still plan to enforce it, which to me means that probably 8,000 truckers will lose their livelihoods. That people have used the option to go to 2000 or later model engineer. The people that had the money and the initiative did that already. The used truck market is zilch, and that means that their choice is either to spend vastly more than that, or either to get enough money from you to be able to buy whatever will qualify as basically a new truck, or or buy a new engine or something, that meets your requirements, or far more. But since those requirements are going to tighten up every few years, in terms of getting 500,000 miles of use out of a truck over however many years that is, they would have to have everything paid for all the way down to that $30,000 to $50,000 mark, so that they're not spending more than that initially. So instead, the option is to convert. Now, since we're talking about drayage and stuff, many of those trucks, probably a large proportion, I'm guessing 75% or 2/3 to 75% of those trucks are going to be able to be committed to short haul use. And short haul use up to 100 miles with 200 watt hours per kilogram, up to 200 miles with the Amprius just said that as of 2024, they're going to come out with a 450 to 500 watt hour per kilogram battery. But that won't be until 2024, which doesn't work for this. So basically, the trucks that can make do with the current lithium batteries can be converted now to full battery electric and if you set it up so that that they're able to do it at scale. In other words, if you arrange for financing for people, if you give them some money to get actually into production, and to air freight some motors from China to get them integrated, to integrate the system that's already been designed and the parts are already there, but they're being told that 4-week to 7-week lead times to get motors, to get inverters, to get things like that. So electronics, control electronics. So what I've been working on is the idea that we could set up, working with the California Department of Employment and Education and the community colleges and stuff, we could basically train people between now and 4 to 6 months from now on doing conversions, which with kits, so that we're talking about a 2 to 3 day conversion with a team of people, and we could have that. So what I'm saying, so basically, he's ready to go into production, but he doesn't, other than the funding, and he is already converting, I believe, a class 3 or 4 truck, which he will bring to California to get certified. But that's medium duty. So we need to, so he's trying to get set up to do the class 8, the heavy duty drayage. And so that technology is there, and the cost will be much, much less. We're talking about 1/3 of the cost. If he can do it, 100 to 1,000 trucks, parts that he can order at a time, then that is going to cut the cost to 1/3 or less of the cost of a new battery electric vehicle. And it'll have motors that are strong enough to take it up hills at speed, like the grade, the grapevine, things like that. They'll be able to to keep pace with traffic and stop and go traffic. Now there's a strong system that works well, that has good efficiency, and that with the current lithium batteries, with the best of the current lithium batteries, is able to meet a drayage or a haul from Los Angeles, Long Beach to those inland warehouses, the 50 miles and back, especially if we set up charging infrastructure at each end, so that when they're in line waiting or when they're getting unloaded, they can be charging. That can be done with solar canopy on the roof, and with rooftop solar and solar canopy over the entire yard, not just the parking spaces, but a solar canopy over the entire yard. And we are aiming to get 30% efficiency solar thin film developed by the end of this year and be able to go into production next year, or the pilot plant like production, 2 gigawatts per year production in 2023, and like 60 gigawatts of production in 2024. So my strategy, in other words, to minimize the harm, is to get the short duty trucks converted to battery electric using a kit like his, and starting this year. Next year, you defer the prohibition for the trucks that can't be served by diesel batteries. I mean, by the current lithium batteries, have that postponed a little bit. You see what I'm saying? And then as the technologists, and then help us bring the technology to market faster, so we can kick it in, so we can convert all these trucks instead of having to buy new trucks.
Thank you, Mark. I think I heard sort of 2 recommendations embedded within that. The first, you were pointing out, rightly so, that many of our target fleets that we are looking at typically spend much less than a new diesel, and therefore would need a larger incremental potential incentive. I think this was a point that Matt was also perhaps making. And we have heard perhaps that the right incentive level might be a little bit more than 2 times HVIP for new vehicles. And then you were speaking about conversions. And there was a time that we had considered potentially allowing vehicle types or used vehicles or conversions that weren't yet in HVIP catalog. However, at this time, the program will be limited to all of those trucks and conversions that have California EOs and are in the HVIP catalog. Matt?
Hey, thanks again, Nikki. This is Matt Schrapp from the Harvard Trucking Association. It'd be helpful if everyone could, identify themselves just for, who they're with. It's helpful for especially those of us in the industry who might want to reach out to folks who have made comment here to know what organizations they represent. And, while this is a great opportunity to kind of discuss and provide a good pathway for folks to come up with some innovative solutions, I would say that while we want the HVIP money, I think the entire industry wants the HVIP money to go as far as possible. The challenge with other programs, and maybe, this can kind of tie into May's question about, can this stuff be stacked, which you alluded to, I believe, Nikki, that said that it can't. The other programs are scrap and replace. And so it makes it difficult for people to have to, especially in some type of innovative financing capacity, to find a truck to go and scrap it. Other programs limit your ability to do a leasing structure in the first place. So, the wonderful thing about HVIP is that as a voucher, it allows for fleet expansion, not necessarily replacement. But I think that it's important to recognize, and you've mentioned a couple of times now how, the amount is important. With the cost of trucks today, the more we can get out there. I mean, an electric truck now, as it's priced out, can cost you as much as a condominium somewhere. So it's important to try to bring down that cost as much as possible for the end user and for the folks who are going to be providing some type of service. If you can lower the truck cost as much as possible, then the other accoutrements, if you will, like financing, rate, infrastructure, et cetera, I think will be helpful from a total price parity standpoint. So, while I can appreciate definitely wanting to stretch out HVIP as much as possible, I don't think we should rely on other programs for the truck replacement side and really try to point people in a direction to work with a vendor who would be proposing something under innovative that could help them with the infrastructure side of things. And I don't envision the on-road or drayage rules being delayed at all. So we'll be seeing many small fleets without the ability to re-register vehicles into 2023 So anything that we can get that's not overly complicated, that can set up a pathway for meeting the standards early would be helpful. But I just would want to reiterate that, especially in HVIP, although we want it to go as far as possible, that truck buy down amount, especially for small fleet class 8 in particular, which is a challenging model to begin with. This isn't necessarily as easy as all back to base, lighter duty, medium heavy. That's important. That's important. So I just wanted to reiterate that. Maybe you can answer May's question as well and just kind of clarify that if HVIP can be stacked with other programs like Carl Moyer or 1B. Thank you.
I don't see May's question, but my other HVIP colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, but at this time, I don't believe that HVIP can be combined with Carl Moyer funding. I do believe it can be combined with federal funding though, like DARA.
Yes, that's correct, Nikki. HVIP can be combined with other federal or local dollars. So you can't combine HVIP funding with the Carl Moyer program, but you could combine it with federal or local dollars, so certain air district programs.
I see a question here. Is this program only available for diesel vehicles? I have a fleet of commercial gas. No, this would be fine for gas. If you have looked in the HVIP catalog and seen a class 3 maybe truck that is similar to the one that you are currently using, that vehicle would be eligible under this program. So take a look at californiahvip.org, go into the vehicle equipment catalog, and look at those smaller models, and you may find something equivalent to the gas commercial vehicles you're using now. I also see, is this program available for the service industry or trucking only? Yeah, so these are commercial vehicles, class 3 and up. However, if your business is a catering business or a landscaping business, a plumbing business, any of those businesses that are using class 3 through 8 vehicles, you would be eligible to use the HVIP incentive to purchase a new electric vehicle, or you can use this new Isaf set aside to get even more help, support, and infrastructure funding through Isaf if you are a qualified small business. Sue, is there a rule that the truck be retired? So we were just mentioning, say, the Carl Moyer grant program. Those types of programs do require that a truck is retired, and you do receive increased funding from those programs. However, the model under HVIP has been one to not require any type of scrap or vehicle retirement to receive this incentive for a new purchase. Will fleets be able to stack this with PG&E, SCE, and EV charger incentive programs? Yes, I believe so, but we will definitely make sure to figure out if those line up and do not conflict with each other. Please define the acronym ISA. Oh, I think you mean ISAF. It's Innovative Small E Fleets. That's from Nancy.
We do have another raised hand from Margaret Bolter. Margaret, I've opened your line. You can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Hi, my name is Margaret, and I'm with Seam Solutions. I just wanted to first provide a little comment. Yeah, so we're Zeem. We're a transportation as a service provider currently with 2 depots near LAX. Through many conversations with small fleets, we've gained insights such as a lot of them are buying used vehicles. And so the incremental cost of buying a new ZEV is huge compared to fleets that usually buy new ICE vehicles. So this proposal to have an incentive amount that's larger than HVIP makes sense to us. And on another note, and I apologize if this is more relevant for the next topic, but something that's really important is flexibility in the end user, because this would allow us to maximize utilization of the truck and reassign the truck in case, of course, to another small fleet, but allows us to maximize like air quality improvements and benefits to small fleets. So just wondering, like, if you have any thoughts on eligibility for changing the end user.
Yes, that's a great question. So we have considered both these truck as a service or even short-term rental models. And those were some questions we actually had for our stakeholders here today. There's been some consideration given to ideas where perhaps the incentive could be used to subsidize rental rates, in which case we would sort of be doling out the voucher amount over time. Others have advocated rather that the voucher arrive very much the way an HVIP voucher does. It would be completely upfront and then allow the company to structure a lower rental rate, but then require some reporting, like maybe annual or biannual reporting, demonstrating that the truck is in fact being deployed with small fleets who qualify for the program, so that we know that the benefits are benefiting the companies that we're trying to reach. So I'm very open to hearing more discussion and feedback on this topic of how folks believe the incentive should be applied in order to allow for these models, and maybe some feedback on what sort of reporting mechanisms would work best in order for providers to demonstrate that the trucks are being utilized and utilized with the target fleets we have in mind.
Thank you.
We have another raised hand from Adam Browning. Adam, I have opened your line. You can begin speaking.
Hi, Adam Browning with Forum Mobility. And Nikki, just responding to your invitation to comment on like what kind of structure that incentive might look like. In previous conversations, we had heard articulated a concern of wanting to make sure that the trucks that get an incentive are actually put into service. So if you have a rental model, what if nobody rents? I think a creative way of aligning the sort of incentive structure with the public purpose of like making sure that that truck is then put into service would be to pay out the incentive based upon miles driven, and so in essence a performance-based incentive. And then you could structure that so that it would pay out the complete amount like over 3 years, for example, something along those lines. And that way you would ensure that what you're actually paying for getting something into service. There are downsides to that approach as well. If you're trying to set up something for access, that means that you need somebody to be able to bridge that the capital gap. But again, there are a lot of models for essentially aligning ensuring that your money gets used and is useful in the real world. And that is one good way of doing it.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
Next up is Gary Say. Gary, I've opened your line. You can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Great, thank you. Hi, Nikki. Gary Shui with Two Daughters Logistics, small fleet owner. My question is, have you considered offering technical assistance for small fleet owners or for providers with this program? Because it seems like navigating the various requirements, or actually navigating specific issues, like perhaps coordinating with other programs, timelines, how to schedule things, getting quotes perhaps from different dealers, for example, getting a quote from an ICE dealer versus getting a quote from an EV dealer, and coordinating things like infrastructure, and in our case, a different terminal owner. Those are kinds of the issues that I think might require or could benefit from some sort of technical assistance.
Yes, thank you for that comment. It's very well received. As you know, in the past, HVIP has relied very heavily on our vendor network. Our dealers really become the technical assistance resource for fleet purchasers. Though we are seeing that in this program, it may be the right time to start building out some internal technical assistance resources for that type of coordination. And I'm especially sensitive to the one that you have brought up in previous focus groups regarding your landlord and customer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
All right, now, here is a very interesting discussion topic from my perspective, which we have thought about different ways that the provider groups can sort of bring forward their offering. You know, one way is that each proposed sort of voucher request has a specific customer, a specific year, make, and model, specific charger, down to the details of even how much their upgrades might be required at their lot. However, that begins to resemble very quickly a very detailed sort of grant application, and we are in favor of keeping this at the highest level, simplified in the way that HVIP has traditionally been a voucher request process. And to that end, we have been considering the concept that a group of a provider group, whichever that is, right? If it's just your company or your company and a financing company gets together and creates an offering, right? And so this offering then could be approved by the program and then would appear in a catalog, sort of like the HVIP catalog, maybe not with all of the pricing details down to every single vehicle, because we know each vehicle is somewhat customized and each customer has a slightly different charging arrangement. But the proposal now is that providers would give us an offering package that would then be reviewed and approved. And then once that offering is approved, then the provider can go out and find individual customer companies to whom they want to offer this innovative financing model, and then from there we would drill down to the details of each voucher request. Think about that a little, and I would be interested to hear feedback, especially from the provider stakeholders here, of whether or not that makes sense as a way to potentially simplify both your offering and your voucher request process. No takers yet.
We do have a raised hand from Alex Cervenka. Alec, I have opened your line. You can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
All right, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Alex Cervenka over at Kenworth Truck Company. Nikki, I know you and I spoke a little while ago about just such an idea of kind of coming up with a kind of a proposal system and then having that kind of supported by the Isaf program, and then kind of finding fleets after the fact. And I think that would be a kind of a good method to go with. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that I support the idea of kind of having the program set up and then having fleets able to kind of go to a dealer of their choice and essentially just kind of apply for it that way. Because I think some of the difficulty we had with the initial go round and getting our proposals together at Kenworth and PacLease was we didn't quite know how to find the small fleets that would benefit from the program. So I think just having a kind of established method for all the manufacturers and retailers in the space, I think that would be probably the smoothest way to go about it. So all in favor of that.
Great, thank you. Adam's question, so to clarify, would you come forward without a customer? Yeah, the proposal would be yes, that each provider can give sort of an offering menu, and if it is approved by the program, then they could go out and seek customers who are interested in that offering. I also understand that it might take a little bit of time to think that through of like how you would provide an offering under that framework. So I really invite everyone to send in also written responses, comments, questions, and concerns. Again, the email address for that is, well, of course, it can go to any of my colleagues here at CARB. Andrea would be happy to discuss it with you as well. You can also send it to Isaf, ISEF, at californiahvip.org.
And we do have a raised hand from Adam Browning. Adam, I've opened your line for you.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate your follow-up on the comment. And I do think that I was just going to speak to like what you propose. Is really welcome in many ways, and at the same time thinking through like how this would actually intersect with some of the other elements that you proposed. Like, for example, how do you then pitch that this is in fact cheaper than the ICE alternative? You're in effect, without looking at a specific customer, you're making a whole bunch of different assumptions and baseline. So I would look forward to being able to consider this all the way through and provide you written comment back in order to assist in this. Like, I find it immensely helpful if for future meetings like this, just if there were, if you were able to write this all down, and so that we could like come to this conversation with like having already considered some of these proposals, it just would make for a more informed conversation. And so I just humbly request that in the future, it would just be really easy to have these types of proposals laid out ahead of time, and we could be Johnny on the spot with more considered feedback. So thank you for this.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Matt?
Hi, thanks again, Matt from Harbor Trucking Association. Try not to monopolize any time here for sure, but just quick question. Knowing that how the HVIP program works and leaning on dealers, and how this program would sort of be a hybrid version of that, which would really look to the providers to be finding these customers. I'm just curious if CARB or CalStart might be mining the ARB DMV database for, I guess, either, based upon fleet sizes might be a little bit challenging, but to do some direct outreach from the ARB. I know in the past that there's been, postcards sent out regarding regulatory deadlines, but I think what would be helpful probably for any provider that sort of wins out in their proposal, to have the ARB reach out to equipment owners within various GVWR categories and inform them of these participants, if you will. Previously, especially if folks have an approved program, necessarily, as dealers have to go through training under HVIP, so they're technically approved. You have lenders within CalCap who have gone through lender certification that are, approved more or less. So I'm just wondering if there is a willingness on behalf of ARB to do direct outreach to equipment owners. And of course, through associations is also helpful, but sometimes difficult to reach folks no matter what you try to do. So wondering if there's a willingness that potentially providers could count on for outreach by the ARB and or CalStart.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. I believe I have run into you at those California one-stop truck events because you're right. Typically, outreach from ARB tends to come from the regulatory arm in order to keep the trucking population appraised of up-and-coming regulations and opportunities. We always attend those and certainly present on what incentives are available. It's my great hope that we get back to in-person events as soon as possible. But to your point, it is a very challenging market to reach, right? And this we know is one of the key barriers for small fleets. They're in their trucks working, they're on their phones dispatching. They don't necessarily have the additional staff to do the type of planning and attending of work groups and watching incentive webinars. And so overcoming that is going to require, I think, some deep engagement, some strategic outreach. Don't apologize for speaking up here, Matt. We appreciate that you represent a very large segment of our target stakeholder population. And hopefully we can also coordinate with associations like yours and continue to do outreach through both CalSTART and ARB events.
Great. Thank you, Nikki. It's important to reach these folks, especially in light of some of the deadlines that are coming up under Advanced Clean Fleets, and with the drayage community being first on the regulatory chopping block, if you will. Anything that is helpful to facilitate some further understanding about incentive opportunities that are available out there is helpful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Sean Edgar. Sean, I've opened your line. You can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Hi, how's my audio this morning?
Great.
Great. Yeah, I'll just support my colleague and friend Matt Trapp on, I think it might be worthwhile to have a conversation with the trucker staff over at Mobile Source Control Division. The data set that they have is, benchmark at around 40,000 vehicles expire at the end of this year in all vocational truck categories that are reported. That's 40,000 that are reported into truckers. So that data set, I think that if you had a brief conversation with trucker staff, it would be able to help you, one, shape those audience. Two, there was a question asked in truckers years ago about fleets of 3 or less. So that might help you, gauge the smalls of the smalls. But I think the targeted email kind of to support what Matt said wouldn't be a big cost function, but ARB knows who these folks are, and as the program matures, hopefully it'll mature in the next couple of months here, because those are, if not, it's going to be a missed opportunity, because those 40,000 plus or minus vehicle owners with 2007, 2009 engines that are expiring at the end of this year are out making a purchase decision, assuming they're still in business. They're out making a purchase decision, sometime no later than the summer in order to get a replacement truck. So just to support with Matt's conversation, maybe ARB has some internal dialogue. And I think without the dealers getting involved or the public, I think you could, within ARB, do a targeted email and inform those folks of the program's availability, and that they should reach out to the assigned website to be able to choice. But I think that would be a smart marketing move, in my humble opinion.
Yes, thank you very much. And you also brought up the important topic of timing. So while we recognize that the Isaf set aside is small and it is a learning sort of pilot and not enough to address the 40,000 vehicle turnover that you've mentioned happening this year, our goal, though, is to have it opened and available by late spring, early summer, so that those small fleets who are innovative and looking forward to being some of the first to utilize these mechanisms should be able to participate by the summer when they are making those purchase decisions. So thank you for bringing up the timing issue.
Next up is Gary Shui. Gary, I've opened your line. You can unmute and begin speaking.
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to chime in with my support for the marketplace idea, having providers and solutions listed on the Isaf website, if you will. But considering how many operating models are possible, and frankly, we're open to considering any of them at this point, but I think it really comes down to the details to determine whether a particular solution will work for us. So I was thinking of, I guess I would propose that Isaf could, through this marketplace, facilitate the two-way flow of information between fleet owners and providers. So what are the things that the fleet owners need to know from the providers? For example, the terms and conditions, like what's covered or included with their specific solution, what's not included. When we're talking about fuel or infrastructure or maintenance cost or whatever. And how would the pricing be structured? I think those are kind of the basic details we need to know from a provider. But then on the flip side, what does the provider need to know from the fleet owner to generate actual numbers, a real solution? So maybe things like they might need to ask us things like, what is the current purchase price of a diesel, for a fully spec'd out vehicle that we would buy, given the requirements that are placed upon us for all the safety equipment or the GPS equipment or the whatever's. what is our operating cost? I imagine is probably a way to pencil things out. How many miles do we run per route? How many routes are we talking about? How many vehicles are we looking at replacing? Those kinds of things. Maybe I'm not so much recommending like a form per se, but maybe just having a way of alerting us as fleet owners, what kinds of information should we be expected to provide? And then what kinds of information should providers be expected to provide? I think that could help in this exchange of information. Thank you.
Great recommendation, Gary. I really appreciate that. The idea that fleets could also be prepared to provide the information they need, but now we're also talking about a marketplace in which they might be able to signal their interest.
Our next speaker is David Orasa. David, I've opened your line. You can unmute yourself and begin speaking. David, you're still on mute. Oh, all right, it looks like we do not have any other speakers at the moment.
Great, thank you. We actually flowed quite a bit over into sort of our third topic category, which had to do with voucher terms and conditions, right? We started discussing a little bit about whether or not the vouchers would be upfront or paid over milestones, what type of reporting would be required. At this time, we're proposing to just align closely with HVIP as it currently stands, which would be 3-year term with 3 annual reports. Though I think that we do need to take into consideration that financing vehicles very often is 7 years. So if anyone has any thoughts about how those two different items line up, I'd be happy to hear that. We had also proposed potentially that if vehicles are being used as a service or short-term rental type of basis, that there should be some minimum for how many days out of each year they're deployed with a small fleet. So we know that on occasion, some days they will be sitting at the lot, and on occasion, some days maybe they'll get picked up by a larger fleet that doesn't qualify. But we had proposed maybe a minimum of 200 days each year that the vehicle is deployed with a qualified fleet. So those were two of the sort of voucher terms and conditions that we had been considering, but would be open again to feedback from all of our stakeholders, either now verbally or later. Written feedback is appreciated. Again, you can email that to isaf@californiahvip.org.
We do have a raised hand from Lacey Robertson. Lacey, I've opened your line. You can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Hi, Nikki. Thanks so much for everything today. It's really helpful information, and this is an exciting program. I was just wondering if you could provide an estimate of timeline on when you guys are going to put forth like all of these proposals of, where it currently stands out in writing. It's a lot easier to circulate that among different stakeholders that may not be able to participate today, and so then be able to provide thoughtful written comments in addition to having continued conversations with you guys. Do you have an idea of when your proposals will be, you guys are going to be putting them out, or at least a draft, a draft?
That's a good question. We had scheduled for this form of public feedback and comment, and then we had planned on having sort of an amendment or addendum to the current HVIP IM released, as I mentioned, late spring, early summer, which would then signal the opening of the program. I do not know if there will be a draft circulated between now and then, but I will certainly take that comment into consideration and see if there's a possible, since you are now the second one to make that comment, that you prefer to see it in writing.
Sorry, I had to get on another call for a little bit, and that's part of the challenge. Everyone's balancing a lot of different things. So, and even if it was just, it didn't have to have all the details, but the general program, requirements, terms and conditions, so that people could formulate. It's hard to formulate thoughtful recommendations without having that.
Well noted. Thank you, Lacey.
Thanks so much, Nikki.
Our next raised hand comes from Sean Edgar. Sean, I've opened your line. You can unmute and begin speaking.
Hi, how's my audio?
Great.
Great. Just have two suggestions. So in past HVIP programs, either choosing an administrator, or I'd be interested to know what are the plans to administer it. I'm guessing CalSTART will administer the program, and if that's not the case, then let us know. But even in the context of the CalSTART administer program, I think where Lacey was going is what the board is typically called, or the program is called, a draft implementation manual. So even if all the details are not available, it'd be good to at least have some structure. And in the past with HVIP, that's been called a draft implementation manual, understanding that, then that would need to be finalized once the final program is done. But that's one past practice that I would draw from. And then second, I would just not look at it prescriptively from a number of days. Trucking is a highly variable business, as we all know, but I would kind of focus on that minimum miles. I think folks that have participated in grant programs in the past would look at it as a minimum expectation of what the miles are during any calendar year. And then the grant recipient would be able to, voucher recipient would, be able within that envelope to choose what days because vehicle may not be used. If you do the math, that's 5 days a week, roughly, you would expect the vehicle to be out. And once again, seeing it's a highly variable business, I would focus on a minimum mileage and let the recipient figure that out, as opposed to a prescriptive number of days per year. Those are my two suggestions for you: draft implementation manual and focus on miles, not days.
Got you. Thank you.
We have a raised hand again from Gary Shui. Gary, I've opened your line. You can unmute and begin speaking.
Cool, thank you. Hi, I had a question about the initial timeline requirement. My question is, with current HVIP, I think the timeline is 18 months for delivery of the vehicle. I just wanted to ask if you're planning to track that, or keep that same requirement. We ran into that issue with the latest round of HVIP, where the delivery date after purchase order is at least a year out. So to turn that into a comment, I would support that, keeping the 18 months rather than something shorter. Just wanted to ask you about your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I believe in all other ways that we have not outlined here, the Isaf program would align closely with what's in HVIP, the greatest difference being the innovative financing models being allowed, infrastructure and fueling charges being allowed. But in most other ways, I believe it would align. And so I'll definitely take note that you support the 18-month delivery timeline. Thank you.
Thanks.
And we have a raised hand from Matt Schrock. Matt, go ahead and unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Thanks for that. Just a quick touch on a couple of the previous commenters, and my good friend Sean and longtime colleague. The only challenge becomes sometimes with those minimum usage requirements is where that, if you don't meet those minimum usage requirements, what type of repercussions the user might experience. There's obviously swings in usage relative to market conditions, vehicle downtime. There's a lot of different things, and I know that he knows this. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that perspective by any means, but from where we're at, I think the less restrictive, especially for the providers, is helpful, just to allow them to be creative in how they approach this. And then on the 18th month deployment window, while consistency is important relative to the existing HVIP program, the same issues relative to market conditions, supply chain challenges that as exists with the current HVIP, that there would be perhaps a more formalized process for manufacturers who could be experiencing delays in that deployment. clearly we want this to be not extremely complicated so we can get it on the ground, implemented and happening prior to the end of this year, especially. And then take into consideration for folks who are participating in the program and might be running up into a regulatory deadline, as long as that they're engaged in the process, that they should be given regulatory consideration, something along the lines of the manufacturer's delay under the on-road rule and drayage rule. But something I think would be helpful for manufacturers, at least from a peace of mind standpoint, on that deployment timeline, to have something official to apply for an extension should they run into a beyond 18-month deployment. As we've seen over the last 18 months, there are many variables that can come into play which delay the ability of manufacturers to meet deadlines, although many OEMs are looking at creating separate assembly lines specifically for zero emissions, and you have many new actors entering into the mix. 18 months probably shouldn't be a problem, but I would think a release valve, so to speak, should be considered in case something does go sideways in the process.
Great, thank you. I see a couple of questions in the Q&A that I don't know if I've addressed. We have Brandy asking if government agencies would be allowed to participate in this project. That would be the third or fourth comment we've gotten to that effect. Currently, as it's proposed, it's very targeted for privately owned small businesses. However, we will take your comment into consideration. Thank you. I also have a question of whether or not there'll be a lottery if there are too many applicants. So interestingly, we do not at this time predict that we would have such an over demand as is seen very often on opening days of HVIP. We believe that, with the sort of proposal process and then providers going back out to find their customers, that most likely it could be served on a regular sort of first come, first served basis. However, it's important to note that in the case of oversubscription, we should have some plan for how the remaining funds are allocated. So we will take that comment into consideration. Thank you. Can truckers convert instead of replace and get HVIP dollars? I do believe that there are multiple conversion kits available on the HVIP website now. We have a question here regarding hydrogen. I do believe that hydrogen conversions are allowed technology within HVIP, but any of my HVIP colleagues can jump in if I am inaccurate. If you have a commercial vehicle that is not used in a business, could this still be used? Our target audience really are small businesses and not privately owned vehicles. All right. Well, I continue to welcome all of this feedback in writing. So you can contact us or phone and set up a quick call. If you have additional questions or concerns, you can reach out to Andrea or myself, and we are happy to chat with you via Zoom call or accept your questions and comments via email to either of us directly, or again, isaf@californiahvip.org. We do have a few closing announcements, and you can continue to drop questions and answers in the Q&A or in the chat. And I thank you guys so much for the conversation that we've had today. I've learned a lot. We've gotten lots of good feedback. Oh, I see some hands popping up again. Okay, we do have time actually. We probably could go another 5 minutes if we want to go ahead and take the last few raised hands that we have.
Okay, our next raised hand is from Mark Roost. Mark, I've opened your line. You can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Thank you. So Mark Roost, Sustainable Energy, Inc. And also I'm on the advisory board of the Silicon Valley Clean Cities Coalition, and working with people in ports. So can truckers convert instead of replace and get money from you guys? If the a statement, just refreshing, if in volume, aggregating small fleet orders to purchase components in volume, cost for full battery electric conversion will probably be a third of the cost of a new BEV or less. Can CARB coordinate agencies to fund infrastructure training, like CEC, infrastructure CEC, training, employment, education, community colleges, finance, iBank, and possibly nonprofit communities serving banks such as Beneficial State Bank or Credit Union? Can these groups be collectively funded to prepare programs at the necessary scale to protect trucker livelihoods? So I heard the number 40,000, and I've been estimating 8,000 truckers can be unable to register after the end of this year. That I call that an emergency. Can that effort coordinate with technology providers such as us who've developed, and our ally who's developed conversion technologies? Can ARB defer enforcement for longer duty cycle trucks? Because that's the relevant distinction. You can't go 600 miles with a fully loaded truck with lithium batteries because their weight of enough batteries to do that is more than the axle weight, more than the gross vehicle weight rating. And how about minimum miles or operating hours? Instead of just minimum miles, drayage and yard tractors and hostlers don't go very far. So rather than only allow, setting up minimum miles, you could set up operating hours minimums. So if somebody's working 8 hours a day, but they're going just 3 miles or something, you still let them get covered. Driver availability is a big issue now with turnover higher than 90%, and that can impact truck utilization. So that fits there too. And if this isn't actually HVIP itself, are you planning to do vouchers? There's two levels. There's the money for the trucker, and there's also, can you coordinate and help find money for the technology providers?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so this would be structured quite like HVIP in the sense that it is a voucher, and our impression is that the costs incurred by the provider or OEM would be included in the price quoted to the customer. Is there anyone on my HVIP team that would like to address the question regarding conversions? Because I have to admit, I don't know all of the rules regarding truck conversions.
Nikki, I would say conversions are categorically eligible in HVIP, but we've got to get a provider to apply for vehicle eligibility as a conversion in HVIP. And as long as that were met, then that vehicle would also be eligible within Isaf. But I think Isaf is going to rely on conventional HVIP vehicle eligibility process to define the eligible vehicles that could participate in Isaf. And yes, conversions are categorically eligible, but you still have to go through that process of applying to be an eligible vehicle in HVIP or an eligible OEM who would perform conversions in HVIP.
Yes, and under that categorical allowance, hydrogen conversions are also included?
Yeah, we don't have any yet, but it would be categorically eligible.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like our next question comes from Adam Browning. Adam, I've opened your line. You can go ahead and begin speaking.
Thank you for that. You had talked about what to do in the event of an oversubscription, and I just would like to encourage a little more discussion around that, given the fact that, as you said in the last workshop, that less than 6% of the funds in HVIP so far have gone to fleets under 10 vehicles, and that we're seeing rolling off of the drayage registry, something like 6,000 new trucks in less than 2 years that should be replaced not by a newer diesel, but rather by a ZEV. And it feels to me like this is the awesome program that is going to be applicable to the largest part of the drayage fleet. I think it will be incredibly popular. and you will be dealing, and you've got 25 million in it right now that's already approved. The funding gap is upwards of 500 million to actually address all those vehicles that are coming off of the drayage registry. So I would love for you to really think about how to get a lot more funds in it, and think about other ways besides a lottery for dealing with oversubscriptions. There are a lot of ways of dealing with oversubscription. Nobody likes a lottery. One way might be, since you're considering opening up the allowable expenditures to infrastructure as well, and there is other money for infrastructure, you could think about prioritize funding to the applicants that make most efficient use of HVIP and aren't relying upon HVIP for other infrastructure, or bundling in all that other infrastructure money into the HVIP program and making the pot larger. But again, I encourage you to do two things. Really think about a popularity of this program. You put a lot of great work into it, and it's going to be really popular. And make sure that you are just, please don't bake in a lottery. It's just it's a horrible way of running a business.
Right, one strong vote no against the lottery, but I did hear you potentially propose some other types of more maybe competitive or preferential way of organizing the
Absolutely. We'll provide a lot of written feedback, but I just wanted to seed that for you as well as everybody else listening right now, because I think you've got an awesome program and we want to really plan. If you can make this work to really solve problems, it should be the main HVIP, not what HVIP is right now.
Great, thank you. I'll address two quick questions in the chat. Angela is asking again if this would require any replacement or retirement of vehicles. No, like HVIP, this would be an incentive given without the requirement to retire or scrap a vehicle. Would the 20 vehicle size apply to existing vehicles? Yes, we're currently proposing that this program would be eligible to small businesses who have 20 or less vehicles in their fleet. And will be notified by email when this recording is posted on your site. Yes, we will endeavor to post video notes and other information.
And we have one more raised hand from Matt Schrapp. Matt, I've opened your line.
Thanks, guys. And I know we're getting towards the end here, so I'll try to make this brief. Yeah, my vote against lotteries also, I've been playing those for years, still haven't won. So they always have their challenges, a little bit of levity there for all my friends and colleagues out on the line today. And I just, Nikki, you might have mentioned this, and I apologize because like Lacey said, most of us are trying to triple task right now. Are we anticipating a release of some type of draft guidelines for folks to comment off of, or are you going to just kind of expect people to comment and then build a draft implementation manual relative to those comments? And is there a deadline for providing comments? Because it's just, they're getting lost in the wash here in some of the details about, well, yeah, okay, it's only 15 million and less than 20 trucks, but we wouldn't want people to think, like, especially entities that have these leasing capabilities who have well over that revenue threshold and who might have well over that vehicle threshold, that they would be allowed to participate and provide as a provider, if you will, some type of opportunity, but that in fact it would be the end user that would be subject to those standards. So I think it's an important clarification because we wouldn't want folks to get confused. There's so many programs going on out there now. And we've always said, as well as our sister organizations have always said, that limiting fleet size participation, especially from a voucher perspective, is challenging because really small fleets benefit from the secondary market being populated. And we need that now because there is not one for zero emission vehicles. So probably a clarification on that. And I would think that not setting a minimum time, like, you'd mentioned 7 years, but if someone can get it done in 5 with price parity, compared to diesel, or even a short-term rental or something to that effect that would allow folks to access these vehicles? Because there's several creative models out there that I've run across so far, but trying to make this as flexible as possible, I think is good. And then a clarification on who can actually participate from a provider standpoint versus an end user standpoint. And I guess last question is, and perhaps I missed it, but would we be anticipating some actual written draft that folks can comment on, or are you guys just waiting for people to respond and then provide something that way? So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So at this time, we had not necessarily scheduled the release of a draft implementation manual. So I would highly encourage anyone who would like to submit written comment to do so now. But now that I have heard so many folks requesting some sort of draft implementation manual, we will certainly take that into consideration. Regarding your other question, yes, we had proposed that a provider, could be a much larger fleet that's doing short-term rentals. You can think of the largest rental companies in the country, potentially having a fleet of electric vehicles that they could place with smaller fleets. However, I will note that we've certainly heard feedback from our friends in labor of not wanting to support potentially exploitative leasing arrangements between larger fleets and their owner operators who may or may not be classified correctly. So we've heard
okay, so I appreciate that, Nikki. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm not talking about leasebacks from trucking companies to owner operators, which is something that in California especially is practically non-existent these days. So whatever type of speculation we want to do to leasing arrangements based upon behaviors in the past is one thing, but I'm talking about entities that perhaps they don't own trucks, but they make more revenue. And I'm thinking of, and you alluded to some of these larger leasing entities. I'm talking about like Ryder or Pack Lease or TCI, or even some of the smaller guys like For Mobility, that limiting their participation is not going to serve for an effective, efficient program. You need these larger companies to be able to provide something so they can create price parity with ICE. This isn't about leasebacks from one fleet to another, or from an overlying or a third-party finance company that's controlled by a motor carrier to an owner-operator. That's not what this is about. It's about allowing folks who have the ability to create a program. There are leasing companies out there that have existed for decades that should be able to participate in this. And it's one thing the end user can have some type of cap, but the ones who are providing should not be limited from a revenue or a fleet size standpoint. It's if they're a bona fide leasing entity, or if they have a California lender's license, or if they're a small business lender, they should not be precluded from participating in this. Otherwise, we're designing it for failure. This isn't about leasebacks and what labor or whomever has to say about that. That is not this. This is about bona fide leasing entities. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, and I know we're getting to the end. So thank you, Nikki.
No, but you're right, Matt. So those larger companies, those would be providers, and they are not prohibited based on their company size. It's the end user who would have to meet the 15 million or 20 or less. So for that clarification, I will certainly agree with you that was our intention all along. And many of the companies you listed are the ones that we have solicited to participate in this program and give us feedback on the framework. So that is our goal. Thank you. You're right, we are at time and we have a few closing announcements to be made. So thank you everyone for your participation, and I really look forward to seeing your written feedback as well.
All right, a big thank you, Nikki, and to everyone for participating in today's discussion. I certainly learned a lot and really appreciate everyone's great feedback. So one thing I want to note, this is really only one part of the larger effort that we're making at CARB to provide greater support for small fleets. And the $25 million that we were discussing for the innovative small e-fleets pilot today is really was approved by our board last year as part of the funding plan for clean transportation incentives. And every year we develop a new funding plan describing how we will expend funds appropriated by the legislature to support incentives for zero-emission passenger vehicles, clean mobility options, and zero-emission heavy-duty vehicles and equipment. And we're just about to kick off the process of developing the fiscal year 2022-2023 funding plan. And so I wanted to let everyone know we have an initial workshop coming up on March 15th, and I'll post a link with more information about that in the chat. And we do anticipate part of the conversation that we'll be having this coming year will be if we're providing additional funding to Isaf in future years and additional changes within this program or other programs to better support small fleets. So we really invite you to join in those discussions as well. And on that note, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Danielle Lawrence, to discuss another effort to support small fleets that will be ramping up this year in support of Senate Bill 372. Danielle?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for your participation today. I just wanted to give a brief description of Senate Bill 372, which is a new bill that was approved by the governor in fall of 2021. And SB 372 directs CARB to develop the medium and heavy duty zero-emission vehicle fleet purchasing assistance program. And that's in conjunction with the California Pollution Control Financing Authority, that's the CPCFA, to make financial tools and non-financial supports available to fleets that are transitioning to zero-emission vehicles. To meet the requirements of this program, staff is aligning with existing CARB programs that are already underway in supporting these fleets, such as Isaf, so that we can build upon and maximize what's being learned throughout this process of development. So we will be discussing SB 372 throughout the funding plan process and at the kickoff meeting on March 15th. So we're looking forward to having participation in this program as well. So I'm going to go ahead and drop my email also in the chat and look forward to additional participation there. I think I listened to this entire workshop without my dog barking. And then when I start talking, she of course goes crazy. So I hope that wasn't too distracting as it was for me.
All right, thank you, Danielle, and a big thank you again to everyone. And we certainly encourage you to reach out to Nikki, Danielle, myself, the Isaf email address that was shared multiple times. If you have additional questions or comments, we're happy to set up meetings to discuss, and you're also welcome to submit written comments to us as well. So again, thank you for your participation and have a great rest of your day. And I see a question about deadline for comments, and we really encourage you to submit those as soon as possible, ideally within the next 2 weeks.